My phone buzzed at 6:47 in the morning, on the single most important day of my life so far, and I already knew who it was before I looked at the screen. My mother. I was standing in front of the mirror in my apartment, still in my robe, my cap and gown laid out on the bed behind me like something sacred. 4 years of early mornings, of skipped parties, of ramen dinners and library carols that smelled like old coffee and older paper. All of it led to this one morning. In 6 hours, I was going to walk across a stage in front of 3,000 people, shake the dean's hand, and become the first person in my family to graduate with honors. I picked up the phone anyway. I always did. Some habits take longer to break than others. "Good morning, sweetheart," my mother said, in that bright, brittle voice she used when she wanted something and had already decided I was going to give it to her. "I need you to change your plans today." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "Mom, it's graduation day." "I know what day it is," she said, and there was an edge underneath the sweetness now, the way there always was. "That's exactly why I'm calling. Your sister needs you at the venue by 9. The florist is having some kind of crisis and Chelsea is a wreck, and I simply cannot manage everything myself." I looked at my gown, at the little gold honor cords folded neatly on top of it. "Mom, my ceremony starts at 10. "Then you'll have to miss it," she said, as easily as if she were telling me to skip a dentist appointment. "It's just a ceremony, honey. You'll get the diploma in the mail either way. Chelsea only gets married once." I want you to sit with that for a second. Because I did. I sat with it for a long, quiet moment, phone pressed to my ear, staring at a cap and gown I had earned with 4 years of my own 2 hands, being told it was just a ceremony. "And if I don't come," I said carefully, "what happens?" There was a pause. And then, in a voice gone suddenly cold and businesslike, the voice she used when she wanted to make sure I understood the stakes, "Then I stop paying your tuition for next semester. You're not walking that stage for a diploma I'm still funding, while ignoring your sister on her wedding day. Family comes first. I need you to remember that." Here is the thing my mother did not know. Standing in her kitchen 3 states away, holding what she believed was the only leverage she had left over my life. She didn't know that 4 days earlier, I had signed an offer letter for a job that would pay me more in my first year than she and my father made together. She didn't know I had already resigned from my part-time position, already found an apartment near my new office, already set up direct deposit into an account she would never see a dime from. She thought she was holding a gun to my education. She had no idea the gun wasn't loaded anymore. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. "I understand." She exhaled, satisfied, already moving on to the next crisis. "Good. I knew you'd do the right thing. Be there by 9. I hung up the phone and looked at my gown for a long moment. Then I looked at the clock. I had a decision to make. And by the time the sun set that day, my entire family would understand exactly how wrong they had been about who I was. But to understand how we got to that graduation morning, to that ultimatum, that phone call, that moment my mother handed me a threat with no teeth left in it. "You have to go back. You have to understand what it was like growing up as the daughter nobody was rooting for." Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep bringing you more stories like this one. And I always love knowing who's listening. Drop the state or country you're tuning in from down in the comments. Now, let's go back to the beginning. My sister Chelsea is 2 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she has been the sun our family orbited around. It wasn't anything dramatic. There was no single cruel moment I could point to and say, "That's when it started." It was smaller than that, and somehow that made it worse. It was the 1,000 tiny signals a child picks up on long before she has the words to describe them. It was the way my mother's voice changed when she talked about Chelsea's day versus mine. It was the way report cards were handled. Chelsea's B- in algebra got her a private tutor twice a week, paid for without a second thought, while my straight A's got a distracted, "That's nice, honey," over dinner, before the conversation turned back to Chelsea's cheer squad drama. When Chelsea turned 16, my parents bought her a used Honda Civic, cleaned up and detailed like it was brand new, with a bow on it in the driveway. The whole cinematic moment. When I turned 16 2 years later, I got a bus pass and a summer job application from my father, who told me, not unkindly, that it would build character. I don't think my parents ever sat down and decided to love one daughter more than the other. I don't think it worked like that. I think Chelsea was simply louder about her needs, and my parents were the kind of people who gave attention to whoever demanded it most urgently, and over the years, that pattern calcified into something that looked a lot like favoritism, because functionally, it was. Chelsea struggled in school, so she needed help, so she got help. I did fine in school, so I needed nothing, so I got nothing. On paper, it almost sounds fair. In practice, it taught me something no 16-year-old should have to learn on her own. That in my family, self-sufficiency was not a virtue to be rewarded, it was a reason to be overlooked. So I adapted. I stopped asking for things. I started keeping my achievements quiet, because I'd learned that announcing them at the dinner table just meant watching my mother's eyes drift toward Chelsea mid-sentence. I got a job at 17, folding sweaters at a department store on weekends, and I started saving. Not for anything specific at first. Just saving, the way you do when some instinct deep inside you already knows that no one is coming to save you but yourself. By the time college applications rolled around, I had a plan. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I wrote essays until my hands cramped. I got a partial academic scholarship to a state university with a strong business program, and I remember calling my mother with the acceptance letter still trembling in my hands, genuinely excited, genuinely hoping that this, finally, would be the thing that made her look at me the way she looked at Chelsea. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said. And then, almost immediately, "Did I tell you Chelsea got asked to prom by that boy on the lacrosse team? You should see her dress." I stopped hoping for that particular kind of look, somewhere around age 19. It didn't happen overnight. It was more like a slow leak, a hope that quietly deflated over years of small disappointments, until one day I noticed it simply wasn't there anymore, and I felt strangely calm about its absence. My father was a different kind of complicated. He wasn't cold, exactly. He was absent in the way some fathers are present in body, but not in attention. The kind of man who let my mother run the household's emotional weather, and simply nodded along with whatever forecast she gave him. If my mother said Chelsea needed something, my father found the money. If my mother said I could handle things on my own, my father agreed without ever asking me if that was actually true. I don't say any of this looking for sympathy. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand the architecture of my family before I tell you what happened at that wedding, because none of it makes sense without it. You have to understand that by the time I was 22 years old, I had already spent a lifetime learning to build things for myself, quietly, without announcement, without needing permission or applause. Which is exactly what I was doing the year Chelsea got engaged, at the exact same time I was finishing my senior year of college and quietly, privately, interviewing for the job that would change my life. Neither of them had any idea. Chelsea got engaged in October of my senior year, to a man named Brandon who sold commercial real estate and wore his college fraternity ring on a chain around his neck, which should tell you most of what you need to know about him. My mother called me the night it happened, breathless with excitement, and talked for 45 minutes about the proposal, the ring, the venue she already had in mind, without once asking how my thesis defense had gone that week. I let it go. I was used to letting it go. The wedding date was set for the second Saturday in May. I remember the exact moment I realized what that meant, because I was sitting in my apartment with my university's academic calendar open on one tab and Chelsea's wedding website open on another, and the dates lined up perfectly, cruelly, like some cosmic joke. My graduation ceremony, the one I had scholarships and student loans and 4 years of 18-hour days riding on, was scheduled for the same Saturday morning as my sister's wedding. I called my mother immediately, still holding on to some naive hope that this would matter to her, the way it mattered to me. "Mom, did you know Chelsea's wedding is the same day as my graduation?" There was a pause on the line, and then, breezily, "Oh, is it? Well, I'm sure your school does the diploma thing more than once. Chelsea only gets married once." The diploma thing, 4 years of my life, reduced to the diploma thing. I tried, gently at first, to explain what the day meant to me. I told her about the honors program, about walking with distinction, about the fact that my professors, the same professors who'd written my recommendation letters, who had believed in me before my own mother did, would be there to watch. I told her my roommates were coming, that I'd already RSVP'd, that this was the one milestone in my life I had actually looked forward to celebrating. She heard none of it. Or she heard all of it and decided it simply didn't outweigh whatever Chelsea needed that day, which by that point in the wedding planning process seemed to be everything, constantly, urgently. "You'll figure it out," she said, in the tone she used when a conversation was over, whether I agreed or not. "Family comes first. I want to be honest with you about something. At 22 years old, some small, tired part of me almost believed I would have to figure it out, meaning, quietly give up my own day the way I had quietly given up so many things before. That part of me had been trained since childhood to expect this outcome, to expect that whatever I wanted would eventually be weighed against whatever Chelsea wanted, and Chelsea would win, because Chelsea always won. But something had changed in the months leading up to that phone call, something my mother didn't know about, something I hadn't told anyone in my family because, frankly, I had stopped expecting them to care about the details of my life, the way they cared about the details of Chelsea's. In February, 4 months before graduation, I'd gone through 3 rounds of interviews with a growing technology company that had recruited on campus that fall. I'd made it through the technical assessment, the panel interview, the final round with the VP of my department. And in early March, an offer letter landed in my inbox that made me sit very still at my desk for almost 10 full minutes before I could bring myself to open the attachment a second time to make sure I'd read the number correctly. It was a 6-figure salary. For a 22-year-old fresh out of state school, it was more money than either of my parents had ever made in a single year, combined. There was a signing bonus, there was a relocation stipend, there was a start date in June, 3 weeks after graduation, in a city 4 hours from the town I'd grown up in. I signed it on a Tuesday night, alone in my apartment, and I remember crying. Not from sadness, but from something closer to disbelief, the feeling of watching a door open that you had convinced yourself, over many quiet years, might never open for you. I told no one in my family. Not because I was hiding a secret with some grand plan already in mind. At first, honestly, it was simpler than that. I had learned, over 22 years, that good news shared with my mother had a strange tendency to get absorbed into whatever Chelsea needed at the time, and I didn't want this one thing that was entirely, completely mine, to become a footnote in someone else's story. So when my mother called with her ultimatum, 3 weeks before both events, threatening to cut off tuition I no longer needed for an education I had already finished paying for, she had no idea she was threatening a woman standing on entirely different ground than the daughter she thought she knew. "Okay, Mom," I said, that day on the phone. "I understand." I let her believe she'd won, because for the first time in my life, her leverage meant absolutely nothing, and there was something almost peaceful about that realization. The quiet, private knowledge that the strings she thought she was still pulling had already been cut. The 3 weeks between that phone call and the wedding were some of the strangest of my life, because I spent them performing a version of myself my family still believed existed. Chelsea's demands, once she heard I'd come around, multiplied almost overnight. I was added to a group chat called Chelsea's Big Day that buzzed constantly with tasks. pick up the bridesmaid dresses from alterations, confirm the seating chart with Aunt Diane, who apparently could not sit anywhere near Uncle Rick, help address 240 envelopes by hand because Chelsea had decided calligraphy fonts looked cheap. I did all of it. I showed up to the rehearsal. I smiled in the photos. I even helped Chelsea zip herself into her gown for the final fitting, and when she turned around in the mirror, genuinely radiant, some old and stubborn part of me still felt happy for her, underneath everything else. My mother, meanwhile, became warmer toward me than she'd been in years, and I understood exactly why. She believed the threat had worked. She believed I had folded, the way I always had, and my compliance had restored the family's equilibrium. Chelsea in the center, me quietly orbiting, everything back where it belonged. "I'm proud of you for stepping up," she told me one evening, on the phone, while I stood in my nearly packed apartment, surrounded by boxes she knew nothing about. "This is what family's about." I said thank you. I didn't correct her. There was no version of that conversation where the truth would have landed as anything other than an attack, and I wasn't ready yet. I was waiting, though I couldn't have told you, in that moment, exactly what I was waiting for. In private, my life was moving forward at a pace that felt almost dizzying. I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment near my new office, a bright, sunny place with a balcony I'd stood on during the video walkthrough and thought, quietly, I did this myself. I coordinated a moving date for the second week of June. I bought a work wardrobe, piece by careful piece, on a budget I set for myself and never once had to ask anyone else to approve. The only person who knew any of it was my academic advisor, Dr. Alvarez, a soft-spoken woman who had written one of my recommendation letters and who I'd gone to see, almost on instinct, the week after that ultimatum phone call. I sat in her office and told her everything: the wedding, the graduation, the threat, the job offer no one in my family knew about, and she listened without interrupting, the way good mentors do. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I've carried with me ever since. "You don't owe anyone a performance of need," she told me. "You already built the thing they thought they were withholding from you. That's not selfish, that's just true." I thought about that a lot in the days that followed. I thought about it while I addressed 240 wedding envelopes in Chelsea's perfect calligraphy font. I thought about it while my mother thanked me, again, for being such a good sister, as though showing up for my own family was a favor I was doing them, rather than a bare minimum I'd been guilt-tripped into. And I thought about it on the Thursday before both events, when I quietly submitted my RSVP to the university's honors ceremony, confirmed with my department that I would, in fact, be walking that stage, and told exactly no one in my family that I had made my choice. They believed the story they'd told themselves. I let them keep believing it. There is a particular kind of quiet power in letting people underestimate you right up until the moment it stops serving them, and by Friday night, packing my gown into my car with the same careful hands I'd once used to fold sweaters at 17, I understood I was standing right at the edge of that moment. The morning of the wedding, my phone buzzed at 6:47, and by 6:52 I had made my decision, the one I'd actually already made 3 weeks earlier. If I'm honest with myself, the moment my mother called my education just a ceremony. I called Chelsea's wedding coordinator, whose number I had because I'd been unofficially drafted into wedding day logistics, and told her, kindly and honestly, that I would not be at the venue that morning, and that she should reassign my small list of tasks to my cousin, who I knew would happily step in. I did not call my mother. I did not want to give her the chance to talk me out of a decision I had already, quietly, made peace with. Then I put on my gown. I want to tell you what that morning felt like, because I think about it often. The campus quad was full of families in their best clothes, balloons tied to folding chairs, grandparents fanning themselves in the early summer heat, professors in full academic regalia lining up in a procession that stretched the length of the science building. My roommates found me near the fountain, and one of them, Priya, took one look at my face and just hugged me. Hard, without asking a single question, because she already knew everything. "They have no idea what they're missing," she said into my shoulder, and I let myself believe her. I sat in the second row, reserved for honors students, my gold cords catching the sunlight every time I shifted in my seat. When they called my name, my full name, first, middle, and last, the name my mother gave me before she ever learned to weigh it against anyone else's, I walked across that stage on legs that didn't shake, and I shook the dean's hand. And for one full, suspended second, standing in front of 3,000 strangers and the handful of people who actually loved me, I let myself feel the entire weight and joy of what I had built with nobody's help. My roommate's mother, sitting a few rows back, took a photograph of that exact moment, my hand in the dean's, my face caught somewhere between disbelief and pride, and posted it to Facebook an hour later, with a caption about how proud she was of her honorary daughter. Facebook, it turns out, is a small world. My Aunt Diane, seated at table 6 of Chelsea's wedding reception, 200 miles away, happened to see that photograph pop up on her phone screen sometime around 1 in the afternoon, while the caterers were clearing the salad plates. I didn't know any of that was happening. I was at a diner with my roommates, still in my gown, eating pancakes and laughing for the first time in weeks, when my phone started buzzing. Not once, but over and over, my mother's name appearing again and again on the screen. I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Where are you?" My mother's voice was somewhere between panic and fury, pitched low, clearly trying not to be overheard. "Diana just showed me a photo of you in a cap and gown. Today. Tell me you are on your way here right now." "I'm not, Mom," I said, and I remember how strange it felt to say those 3 words out loud, calmly, without my stomach twisting the way it always used to when I disappointed her. "I'm at graduation. I already told you it was today." "You promised me." I said I understood. I corrected her, gently. "I never promised I'd come." There was a long, furious silence, and then she said the words that, I think, sealed exactly how the rest of that day was going to go. "Get in your car. If you're not here in 2 hours, we are done paying for anything. Do you understand me? Anything. Not another dime." I looked across the diner table at my friends, who had gone quiet, watching me with the kind of careful concern people show when they're not sure whether to intervene. "Okay, Mom," I said, "I heard you." And then I drove to the wedding. Because I wasn't running from this family, not really. I was simply done letting them decide who I was, without any of the facts. I arrived at the reception a little after 4 in the afternoon, still in my cap and gown, my honor cords swinging gently as I walked in, because I hadn't bothered to change, and some part of me, a part I'm not entirely ashamed of, wanted them to see exactly what they'd tried to make me miss. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms do when something unexpected walks into them. Chelsea, radiant in white at the head table, turned to look, her smile faltering for just a second before locking back into place. My father half rose from his seat and then sat back down, unsure what to do with his own body. And my mother crossed the room toward me so fast her heels caught on the edge of the dance floor, grabbing my arm the moment she reached me. "What is wrong with you?" she hissed, low enough for only me to hear, though several guests nearby had clearly caught the tone if not the words. "Showing up here like this, in that, on your sister's wedding day. Do you have any idea how this looks?" "I do, actually," I said, and I remember my own voice sounding strange to me, steady, unhurried, nothing like the voice I usually used with her. "It looks like I graduated with honors this morning, and I'm still choosing to come celebrate my sister tonight, even though nobody in this family thought that mattered enough to ask me to reschedule anything for me. Not once, in 4 years. My mother's face did something complicated then. Anger and confusion trying to occupy the same space at once. "You could have graduated any year. You will not have another wedding day, another chance to—" "Mom?" I said, and something in my tone must have stopped her, because she actually paused. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here because Chelsea's my sister, and I love her, and I wanted to see her get married. But I needed you to understand that I wasn't going to disappear from my own life to make that easier for everyone else. Not anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, and that's when my Aunt Diane, 2 glasses of champagne deep, and apparently unable to help herself, called out from table 6, loud enough for half the room to hear. Wait, is that the girl from the photo? The one who graduated with honors this morning? Honey, get over here. I want to hear about your job. My mother's face went very still. Because here is the detail I hadn't mentioned to her yet. The one I'd been saving, not out of cruelty, but because I hadn't yet found the right moment, and apparently my aunt had just found it for me. Word of the job offer had already started circulating. Priya had mentioned it, proudly, in a comment under that graduation photo, tagging the name of the company, the title, the fact that I was starting in 3 weeks. I felt my mother's grip on my arm loosen. "What job?" she said quietly. So I told her. Calmly, without theatrics, standing there in my gown in the middle of my sister's reception, I told my mother about the 6-figure offer I'd signed a month before her ultimatum call, about the apartment I'd already leased near my new office, about the fact that I hadn't needed a single dollar of tuition help from her in over a year, because I'd been covering the last of my costs myself, with savings and a partial scholarship renewal she'd never bothered to ask about. "You threatened to cut off tuition I didn't need," I said, "for a ceremony you told me was just a formality, and I let you believe I'd chosen the wedding over my own graduation because I wanted to see what you'd do with that belief. Now you know the truth. I'm not the daughter you thought you had leverage over. I haven't been for a while." The silence that followed felt enormous, though in reality it probably only lasted a few seconds before my father cleared his throat awkwardly, and someone near the bar signaled the DJ to start the next song a little too quickly, the way people do when they want noise to cover an uncomfortable moment. I looked past my mother, toward Chelsea, who was watching this entire exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between embarrassment and something softer. Something almost like recognition. I walked over to her. "I'm sorry if this took anything away from your day," I said. "And I meant it. You deserve to have this be about you. I just needed our mother to hear the truth, and this was apparently the only room she was going to sit still in long enough to listen." Chelsea looked at me for a long moment, and then, to my genuine surprise, she reached out and squeezed my hand. "I didn't know," she said quietly, "about any of it. The job, the graduation being today. I swear I didn't know." I believed her. I think, in some strange way, Chelsea had been as shaped by our family's dynamics as I had, just from the opposite direction, raised to expect the spotlight rather than to earn her way around its edges, and neither version of that upbringing had really been a gift. I stayed for 2 more hours. I danced with my cousin, I ate a slice of the wedding cake, which was excellent, and I congratulated Brandon, who seemed entirely unaware of the storm that had just passed through the room 15 minutes before he walked in from taking photos outside. My mother didn't approach me again that night. She watched me from across the room instead, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the old, familiar urge to go smooth things over, to make myself smaller so she'd feel more comfortable. I left around 7, still in my cap and gown, and drove home under a sky just beginning to turn orange at the edges, feeling lighter than I had in years. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced with my family in a very long time. My mother called twice in the first week, both times attempting some version of the conversation we hadn't had at the reception, half apology, half justification, the 2 threads so tangled together I sometimes couldn't tell which one she meant more. I listened both times. I didn't yell. I didn't rehash every old grievance, though God knows I could have. I simply told her, calmly, that I loved her, that I understood she and my father had done the best they knew how to do with what they had, and that going forward, I needed her to ask about my life instead of assuming she already knew the shape of it. "I don't want to lose you," she said during the second call, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. You haven't lost me, I told her, but I'm not going to keep shrinking myself so Chelsea has more room. That part's over. I moved into my new apartment the second week of June, on a bright Saturday morning, carrying boxes up 2 flights of stairs with Priya and 2 other friends, blasting music through a portable speaker, stopping halfway through to eat pizza on the bare floor of my new living room, and laugh until my stomach hurt. I started my job 3 weeks later, walked into an office with my name already on a nameplate at a desk that was entirely, unmistakably mine, and felt something settle in my chest that I think had been unsettled since I was about 8 years old. My mother came to visit that fall, alone, without my father, which I understood to be its own kind of statement. She sat on my new couch, in my new apartment, paid for entirely with money she had nothing to do with, and looked around slowly, taking it all in. You did all this yourself, she said, and it wasn't quite a question. I did, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. I think I spent so many years trying to make sure Chelsea didn't feel like she was falling behind that I never noticed you were already so far ahead I didn't need to worry about you at all. I told myself that was a compliment. I think, somewhere along the way, it became an excuse. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't undo 2 decades of feeling like an afterthought in my own family, but it was honest, and it was more than I had ever expected to hear from her, and I chose to let it be enough of a beginning. Things between us are better now, not because the old wound healed completely, but because I stopped waiting for her to be the one to heal it. Chelsea and I talk more than we used to, actually. Something shifted in her that day at the reception, some quiet recognition, I think, that she'd been given things I'd had to build myself, and to her credit, she's never once tried to pretend otherwise since. I think about that morning often, the phone buzzing at 6:47, my mother's voice telling me my graduation was just a ceremony, the ultimatum she delivered so confidently, so sure she still held every card in my life. She thought withholding a few $1,000s in tuition could still control my future. What she never understood was that I had already spent years quietly building a future she had no leverage over at all. 1 scholarship, 1 job offer, 1 late night in a library at a time, entirely on my own, exactly the way I'd learned to build everything else worth having. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who are standing closest to you, so convinced they already know your whole story that they never think to ask for the ending. My mother believed she still controlled my future the morning she called. By the time the sun set that day, she understood I'd already built one without her, and that from now on, I'd be the one deciding how much of it she got to be part of. If this story meant something to you, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to be in your corner? I read every single one, and if you want to make sure you never miss the next story, go ahead and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.